Thank you very much. Right, thank you very much for that, Tim. And I have to start, unfortunately, with I've actually had a complaint from the Cabinet Office for not being on message. I got like a text thing on the phone saying, you know, hang on a sec, mate, we've just announced that it's all going electric. And you're coming up with this, mass adoption of EVs would be a big mistake. Well, yeah, that is what I think. And hopefully, over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, I'll explain what I actually mean by that. And you may or you may not agree with me. Either way, I don't mind. In fact, I quite like disagreement a bit more than agreement. So that's just a hint for when we do the Q&A bit at the end. So this, I think, is where we are. It's probably not that new a phrase, connected, autonomous, shared and electric, to many of you or all of you in the room. But it is kind of what's happening. And this is very, very different from what we've had before. So what have we had before? We've had basically the internal combustion engine, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, for, 130 years? And it's been a pretty binary model. That's been how it works, technically. In many ways, it's much more sophisticated from the days when it was invented, but certainly in many ways, it's still exactly the same. The process is exactly the same. And so is really the way in which the vehicles are made, how they're manufactured, how you build a supply chain, and how you then put it out into the market and people buy them and use them in some fashion. And we'll come on to a bit more of that in a moment. The thing about this matrix of change that's coming, it's not an absolute quartet of change everywhere right from the beginning. It's something that will evolve depending upon where it is in the world. So for some places, we're going to see all four of those pretty quickly come together. Other parts of the world, we might not, one of them might be missing for a variety of reasons. But when you look at what they all are, they're other than maybe autonomous, they're already with us. Personally, I would say that the sharing part of it is the most important part. That might sound weird, given my company is called Electric Vehicles Outlook, not Shared Outlook. But I think the sharing economy and the principle of using assets differently is fundamentally part of where we're going with climate science, climate change, the process of tackling where we are with all that. I do like to be different, by the way. So even though this is about to be the third slide, it's going to be a commercial break. So given what that quartet of change suggests, robo-taxis, for example, I thought it would be nice to share with you was what would it actually look like? What can we look forward to? What can I really be excited about that's just down the road for me? So here's a little idea of what it actually will look like.
Good morning, Eric.
Yes, good morning. Let's go.
What is your destination today, Eric?
Destination is work, just like every day. Go, start driving.
Would you prefer the standard way?
No, I prefer you take me through China.
China is 15,000 miles from here. Loading maps and alternative language.
No, abort!
A boarding trip to work. What is your destination today, Eric?
Please, I am begging you, just take me to work.
Engaging climate control system.
No, enough with the climate control. Just drive.
Sensing nerves level rising. Activating relaxation music.
No, I just want to drive.
It might be your last chance to drive. Alfa Romeo Giulia, עכשיו בישראל.
Eric.
זה שאתה נושם, לא אומר שאתה חי.
There you are. I don't work for Alfa Romeo, but that's a little glimpse into the future. It's exciting, isn't it? We can hardly wait. Yeah, oh my word. Okay, and also, around the world we've got trial and error. That's always what you get in disruption. The things that people try don't always work first time. In truth, a lot of the sharing economy isn't quite working yet. You know, you go and talk to people who have Drive Now and these other car models of sharing, and they don't really work that well because none of them make any money. And, you know, in other parts of technology, you see what people are trying to progress, and it's a bit sort of rubbish. But the thing with disruption and change is that's often, almost always, what it's like at the beginning. It doesn't work. It's not quite right. But that doesn't mean it's not going to work in the future. And with some refinement and development, etc., it will go. So here's a case in point. So this is in China where they're trialing flying cars at the moment. Obviously, they're not quite right yet, but, you know, it took off. They just didn't carry on going up in the air a bit, but there you are. Anyway, no one was hurt in the filming of that, by the way. Just I don't want to make light of accidents. So I'm going to introduce myself now. Tim was very kind in a few words that he said, but here's the truth. I like to get photographs of myself taken with people. We live in this modern visual age, and even though I'm an old git, I worked out early on, about 5 years ago when I kicked off doing my own thing, although I'd been on LinkedIn for about 15 years, that getting a photograph with somebody was quite useful, especially if there was somebody well known in the arena in which you're working. So I'd pass this on as a bit of advice to everybody in the room, but particularly the younger people. When you get a photograph with someone, so that's the guy who designed the Jaguar I-Pace, that's Ola Kalenius, the head of Daimler, that's Mate Rimac, he's a personal hero of mine. Don't get a picture where you're both looking at the camera. Do it so it looks like you're having a meeting with them. Even though you're not, you're just saying, no, can I like a picture like this, please? And then the person takes the picture. Then it elevates the situation. So, you know, I shouldn't perhaps have told you that. I should have left it as a mystery, but that is what I do. So I'm going to tell you everything. This is going to be a revelation. So, again, Tim explained, I've been in automotive for 30 years. I've been in EVs for 15 years, and that goes back to being at London Taxis, the black cab company, where we trialled a couple of hybrid taxis. We used a company in Canada called Azure Dynamics, and we trialled a couple of hybrid taxis in 2004, 2005 in London. And as you'll all know, hybrid technology includes an engine and a motor, battery and a fuel tank, and therefore is a bit more complex and a bit more expensive. And when we tried that in London, it was very successful in that the drivers thought it was good. They really liked it. It didn't have too bad a range, but not much, because this was 2004. And of course, it was going to make the taxi a little bit more expensive. Now, I don't know if anybody knows how much black cabs are, but they're not cheap. They're not inexpensive to begin with. So the proposition was, let's go and do this hybrid taxi thing. So I was the sales manager at the time, and we had a report back from the drivers, and we went and presented to the board, and it's like, why don't we do this hybrid taxi for London? Clean air technology, better for air quality. This is a long time ago in relative terms to this kind of narrative that we're on now. And I think it was at least 3 members of the board said, no, it's never going to catch on. That Toyota Prius thing, that's like a bit rubbish. You know, they're not going to keep building that. They'll soon jack that in. And remarkably, and quite sadly, London Taxis didn't actually then progress that proposition. If only they had. Just missed opportunity. And in fact, out of that, the chairman of the company at the time, Jamie Borick, was so incensed because he happened to be chairman of the British Lung Foundation, as well as the chairman of London Taxis, that he said, well, I'm leaving then. You know, he threw his toys out the pram. Well, not toys, £14 million worth of equity in the business, but he sold his shares, left, and set up a company called Modec, which I'll show you a bit about later. But that's been my journey. So in and around some car companies. Rimac, does anyone know who Rimac is? Is that a name familiar to people in the room? Yeah, there's a few of you. This is a Croatian supercar company run by a guy called Mate Rimac. That's why I called it Rimac. Mate wasn't such a good name for a company. It's an astonishing organisation. It's 10 years old. It's one of the few companies that Porsche have invested in, and they invested in it quite some considerable sum. When I talked to Mate on stage a couple of years ago about how have you made this company Rimac in Croatia, it's not exactly well known for automotive. How did you get the people? Where are these specialists in batteries and motors and inverters? Where do they all come from? And he said, well, nobody knew anything at the beginning. I hired people for inquisitiveness, intelligence, enthusiasm, passion, and an ability to learn. Sounds like you guys to me. And what then happened, believe it or not, was they went away, read white papers, and looked at tons of YouTube videos. You couldn't make this stuff up, it's true. And now Rimac is one of the most revered and high-quality, innovative electric vehicle enterprises in the world. And that's from just using those components in terms of attitude to learning, which I guess, you know, is exemplified in you bothering to come to a university to learn a subject, to take it away and be equipped. You could build your own world-class startup, possibly. So anyway, there's all those companies. Oh, Ricardo, by the way, I'm not an engineer. Don't ask me how they or why they employed me, but they did. Remarkably, I got into this fantastic company called Ricardo to help sell the wares that the hybrid and electric vehicle team put together, which still stuns me that they did it, but they did, so it's too late now for them to change their mind. LinkedIn, Tim mentioned again LinkedIn. You know, social media isn't just for younger people. It isn't just for, you know, pictures of cats or all that sort of stuff. I've been on LinkedIn almost since it began, and I find it just the most amazing environment to make friends, contacts, connections, learn stuff. You know, watching what people post and publish and all that stuff. Yeah, when you get a bit of a network, of course it's good for your ego. There's no denying that. But more usefully and interestingly, it gives you almost like a university of knowledge from people all around the world. That's what I like about it. It democratizes knowledge and experience, and it's global. You know, I'm very lucky to have contacts and increasingly friends, people that I meet at events, etc., that are from all over the world, China, America, you know, all parts of Asia, Africa, etc. It's very, very useful. But what's not on LinkedIn is this. I'm the co-founder of 2 startups, Josh and Nat. That's Josh, that's Nat. And that's my co-founder, Mrs. Atkins. They're both out of stealth mode now, fortunately. Trouble is, they still need funding. I mean, he's 29 and he's 27, and they're still, I mean, it just keeps going. It's just endless. But the reason for putting that up is those people, especially my boys, but my co-founder as well, are the motivation behind why am I interested in learning this stuff? Why am I here tonight? Why do I do what I do? Because I am truly horrified and scared about what the unintended consequences of my lifestyle and lifetime thus far on the planet, and I want to do something about it. If all I can do is communicate something about it that might make a difference, I should be pleased. But that's kind of as of a grain of sand in the desert, as they'd say. So we are going to come back to electric vehicles, by the way, in case anyone's wondering, you know, where have the EVs all gone? This is the challenge. It's about matching eco with economic. I'm easily pleased by simple things because I'm just simple-minded person, really. I think it's funny that the word eco is in economic. I didn't put it there, it's always been in there. But I think this is the epic challenge now, to find a way of changing so much in terms of this epic challenge. But I think if we can change it in a way in which the economics, the money, the profit, all of that stuff, which, you know, is the real world, the way of the world, if we can inject as much of that into it as possible, into the transition, it's going to help. And I think it will make it happen quicker. So just to give you a little flavour and a frame of reference of what I said a moment ago about, you know, my journey. So I was born in 1959. So from 1960, you'll see this developing. This is all around the world, the GDP, the gross domestic product stuff. When I was born in 1959, there were 3.4 billion people on the planet. There's nearly 8 now. When I was born in 1959, only 3 people in the long road we lived in had a car. We had a television, but I think not until about 1965. In terms of other stuff, we either didn't have it because it wasn't invented, or we didn't have it because we couldn't afford it. And then over time, this GDP thing has gone up and up and up. So it means more stuff, more resources, more minerals, more impact on the environment. We didn't know what it was doing in many aspects. Some people did. But if you look then at what happens, particularly with China, see, where's China now? Look, it's down there, what, 4th? You watch, once we get into really that whole liberation of China, but I want to caveat something. This is not a story about China in terms of some of the issues like GDP, pollution, all the other things. China is part of the whole global economy and ecosystem. Much of what you see go up here in terms of GDP is what the Chinese made for us. We shipped out a lot of our emissions. We shipped out, in truth, until I think last year, a lot of our waste to China to process. So, you know, this is the story of my lifetime and of your life now of recent times. And you can see how it just keeps going up and up and up. And this is the principal measure that politicians use to define the success of a country and their power and their ambition and all the rest of it. What we have to reconcile is how we deal with that growth, or if it continues, or how we can manage it in a different way without the unfortunate consequences that we've had. Oh, we don't want to watch it again. So this isn't me saying these things. I just pick up stuff from people that I meet, and I read more than I've ever read in my life. On that note, by the way, anyone read Good to Great? Fantastic book. If you've not read it, I recommend it. What is it? It's the story, it's the chronicle of 14 companies in America during the 1980s and 90s, I think it was, that basically went from being good companies to great companies. And what did that mean? It meant that they didn't go bust, because a lot of companies did, particularly during the difficult times. It meant that with the right sort of vision, the right sort of leadership, the right sort of, what's the phrase I think they use, people on the bus, you can achieve great things. You can turn, minnow companies, small enterprises, into big successful companies. I think we are now at a point on the planet where we need to turn the planet from good to great. And I think we can learn some direct lessons out of this particular book into that. So I use that to reference my thinking. Here's another one, Orbital Perspective. There's been less than 600 people go into space. I'm absolutely privileged enough to have met two of them, Tim Peake and Ron Garan, the American astronaut who's been on the space station twice. When you talk to those people about planet Earth, it's like almost talking to someone who's been an angel and come back again. They've seen something we will never see and appreciate. It's extraordinary. Yeah, we can see the pictures and the live feeds, but when they're sat in that thing called the cupola, the big round window, looking out at the planet, going around the planet every 90 minutes, that has a profound impact on what you think. This is a recent book. Anyone read On Fire by Naomi Klein? It's like a horror film, horror story. But it's basically the chronicle of how we got to where we are and where do we go from here. What happens next? And then this one, Hop, Skip, Go. This is about multimodal transportation. It's about walking, buses. It's about bicycles. It's about how do we reinstate human beings in our towns and cities, etc., and try and recalculate how mobility and transport works. So I read those books, and I get to go around and meet fascinating people. And out of all of that, this is my kind of sense of where we are. We've got to switch from this linear to a circular economy. I'll explain a bit about that in a second. So again, if we look at, where'd it go? If we look at this again and think about the last two kind of animations that you saw. So this goes back, I wasn't born in 1750, by the way. This is a bit further back than that. But this is the story of the Industrial Revolution. What happened when we then found a way of making immense production, how we invented advertising to create want over need. And this is, I like looking at it to begin with, because the United Kingdom's actually winning for a change. We don't win anything anymore. So look, now we're not, the Americans are winning. But this is, again, that story of the growth of population, the growth of consumerism, the growth of many things, all of which have been inevitable and you might say good, but have all had now this immense unintended consequence, which is that rise to 415 parts per million of carbon in the air. And then the extraordinary thing of that statistic is, because I'm not academic, I don't really grasp some of these things that well until it's explained to me differently. 450 parts per million carbon in the air is 0.00415% of the atmosphere. Now, that doesn't sound like much. You kind of think, well, how can that have an impact? But someone said to me recently, if you sadly see somebody who gets Alzheimer's or one of these malaises that is triggered by the tiniest, minutest little change in the chemical in the brain, and it completely, as good as can destroy your life, it's nothing. It's been just a tiny imbalance of serotonin or the other ones, whatever they're called, and that has this catastrophic effect on your mind. The same thing is happening to the planet. A tiny impact of carbon in the air is having an immense shift and change in how the climate works and how the polar ice caps are shifting or melting, not shifting. It's pretty sad. It's pretty tragic. So, better check the time because we better talk about electric vehicles because that is what I said it was about, didn't I? So, to electric vehicles. Why did I say what I said earlier? Well, here's the thing. We heard today from the Prime Minister and a few other people saying, something's got to give. We've got to bring forward this timeline for, I think it's included hybrids as well now, complete everything. Anything that's not a BEV has got to be finished by 2035. And at the moment, the auto industry is terribly exercised by all of this. So EU emissions regulations right now are 95 grams a kilometre, fleet average, and that's calculated over time independently. And if you don't conform to it, you're going to get some hefty fines. We're talking about hundreds of millions of euros or pounds in our new world. And China's NEV strategy, this is pretty epic. So this was the Chinese only recently putting in a production quota that the OEMs have to make a certain volume. It's another way of doing what's happening here with emissions regs. But that followed really 6, 7, 8 years of very focused, very joined up, very, very targeted ambition from the Chinese government on new energy vehicles. Think about why they call them new energy vehicles. They don't call them electric vehicles. It's not about translation. It's the fact that new energy is renewable energy. The full ambition of EVs is that they run on clean energy. Of course it is. In the short term, they're zero tailpipe vehicles, but they're not zero emission vehicles because, of course, there's a power station somewhere. So the Chinese ambition is definitely joined up around having both vehicles, renewable energy, and of course batteries kind of in the middle of all of that. Oh yes, and then the end of humanity, that's the other consideration. Nearly forgot that one. So the good news is the economic case for electric vehicles is improving all the time. And this is where I'm going to talk more about the mass adoption of EVs. I don't think is going to happen with passenger cars, but I do think it's happening. In fact, it's happening now with commercial vehicles, taxis, buses, and vans. Why? Because for any of you, if you go into a town or city and look around, you see that there's lots of taxis, buses, and vans, and the air quality is poor. So it's not too illogical to think they're the culprits. So it's like a Pareto law. 20% of the vehicles that you see around are causing kind of 80% of the pollution. Before anyone shoots me down, that's not an exact number. So, it might be 2179. I'm not sure. But it's the principle. So the case for EVs is improving all the time. Why? Because battery technology is getting better. When I was at the startup Modec, 12 years ago now, the cost at pack, I think it's pack level, of a kilowatt hour for a battery was $1,112 or something. Now it's about $110, $120. That's a massive reduction. And also, as you've got in any industry, economies of scale help reduce price. So we've also seen that. When I think back on it, I can't believe we actually did what we did in a little factory in Coventry, 12 years ago. We made an electric vehicle. First of all, with a Zebra battery, then lithium-ion battery, LiFePO4 battery. So the costs are coming down, the demand's going up. One of the big issues is, of course, infrastructure. So I'll come on to that in a minute. But this is why the costs are coming down, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because normally in an industry, if the players have got to spend more money, they'll pass it on to you, the customer. So at the moment, the auto industry is bleeding cash like you wouldn't believe, making massive investment in all of this up front in, I won't call it vain hope, but in the absolute hope that it's going to take off at some point. This is a lot of money. $300 billion is a lot of money. Almost half of that is being spent in China. China is the place where you're seeing the government leadership of where electric vehicles are, but not just that, in fairness to the rest of the world. In that China's new economy, which we've seen has developed over a short number of decades, is very urban-based. A huge amount of the population live in cities. And these are new cities in many ways, or very expanded cities. So the way in which mobility and transport works and what the cult of the car is as a kind of iconic part of our lives is very different in China than the rest of the world. So it's inevitable there's going to be quite a difference there. But what we must be careful of in the West, in Europe, in America, is that we don't just sit back and let this Made in China 2025 strategy, which is a lot of things, but for the auto industry, is about rapid development, is about dominance. We shouldn't just sit back and watch and let that happen to us, because we have a noble tradition and great equity in the stuff that we've built before, the imagination of our engineers, the quality of our designers. It would be pretty foolish to just let that slip away. And yeah, we heard today that they're bringing these dates forward. There are different dates all around Europe. It's getting quite confusing, to be honest with you, because I think in Norway, which is the most advanced European country for electric vehicles, perhaps someone's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it might even be 2025. They're going to ban the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, which seems crazy. This was a big moment last year. So this is Mercedes-Benz. So who invented the car? Mercedes-Benz. So the company that invented the internal combustion engine, some would argue it was other people, but let's say it was them, just for argument's sake, they are ending the internal combustion engine. They've already said it. They've agreed with the unions. There are people who've only ever made engines or gearboxes, etc. Or they have, their dad did, their grandfather did, mother or grandmother or sister or whoever it was, but they won't be doing it in a few years hence. And in the auto industry, you've always had collaboration. You've always had people work together to reduce costs, to speed up development, etc. But we've never seen the kind of collaboration in and around the auto industry that we're seeing today. And indeed, outside of the auto industry, connecting up with people like in China, Tencent, Alibaba, Baidu, elsewhere, Google, Apple, all these other companies. There's epic collaboration, joint ventures, and collective ambition to get these things done. I mentioned Modec. Forgive me for a bit of nostalgia. I'm just going to show you a little bit. This is a video we made in, I think it was 2010. So it's only a minute or two. So
our cities are becoming increasingly polluted, and our dependence on fossil fuel is simply unsustainable. But there is a solution. This is Modec, the world's only purpose-built zero-emission commercial vehicle in its class. Modec was conceived as a viable alternative to traditional commercial vehicles. So it had to meet certain criteria such as performance, load carrying capacity and maneuverability. And it had to be able to survive the tough urban environment. By designing the vehicle around the battery, Modec is future-proof, enabling it to take advantage of improving battery technology.
When we finish work, we pull onto a charging point and charge the vehicle up, and as we're on our way home, the vehicle's been charged up overnight, and it's charged back to full power by the next morning.
So there you are. That was, you could almost say that was like yesterday. It looks like a modern vehicle. It's talking about the same narrative that we've got today, but there it was a decade ago. And I'm sort of saddened that I worked at a fantastic company with brilliant engineers, great designers, just a small team. There are only like 55 of us. And we did all that and we failed. I don't want to say this is why we failed, but putting the next picture up. So David Cameron opened the factory. I guess if we all knew then what we all know now, we'd do a few things differently. I expect he would, that's for sure. So yeah, that's where we were, that's what happened. So Modec's mantra back in the day was this. It was urban operating, defined mileage, back to base vehicles are the best fit for EV. Why? Because you can build your own infrastructure in your facility. Urban operating means that's where the pollution is, and stop-start is good for an EV, putting regen in and all that kind of stuff. And defined mileage means there's no range anxiety. If you buy a commercial vehicle like these guys did, and it can do 100 miles, and then you say to them, okay, you can do 100, and I was trying to be an honest sales director. So I'd say to these guys, right, here's the battery, it does 100 miles. And they'd say, really? Does it definitely do that? No. I'd say in the winter, probably do 70, might even do 60. So what they then did was scoped buying vehicles for particular routes that would do 60 miles. Because in the winter, certainly with the current battery technology that we've got, if you didn't know, I'm going to tell you, it's not really a dirty secret, but sort of is. Electric vehicles have two ranges, a summer range and a winter range. So when you're buying one or considering buying one, it's not a bad idea to think about what it might be in the winter in terms of if it's tight. But more to the point, back then, as it is now, the best fit for electric vehicles is commercial vehicle fleets, taxis, buses and vans. And that's where we need to see mass adoption. And we will see mass adoption. We're seeing it now. So, does anyone know how many electric vans Amazon ordered last year from a startup company called Rivian in America? Anyone shout it out if they know? Okay, I'll tell you. 100,000. They ordered 100,000 electric delivery vans. That's a big order. I bet you the people in Stuttgart, the Daimler team and the Ford team and all the other OEMs that have been around forever, they were probably a little bit disappointed. Let's put it like that. So this company, UPS, they ordered 10,000, but with an option for 10,000 more, electric vans only last week. And that's a company called Arrival. They're based in Banbury. And, you know, that's not too far from my house. And, yeah, it's this same company. But what they're doing that's different and interesting is they're using different material sciences in the construction. They're using different strategies in terms of manufacturing. They're looking at having micro factories. So they're not going to have one big factory with a great big supply chain with stuff coming from all over the world. They're going to localize the production, build the vehicles very differently. So now that proposition is a price parity proposition on buying a diesel or a petrol van built in the traditional way. So, you know, things have moved on a lot. It isn't just that Modec was 10 years early and like they've just come along and stole what we kind of set up. Absolutely not. You know, the capability now in innovation that we're starting to see is quite amazing. So forgive me for a second. I'm going to show you a quick video that's 10 years old again. Well, I like looking at it because this is me 10 years ago and about 2 stone lighter actually, I think.
Electric and hybrid electric work, particularly where there's defined back-to-base operation, relatively limited mileage, and an ideal application for that certainly is a full electric vehicle.
I've had a lot of pies since this video.
Reduce CO2, but you can also reduce NOx, local emissions. Really, it's a combination of seeing more manufacturing and seeing that innovation come.
So that was, that was 10 years ago. So, you know, we were on that mantra back then. We won't watch that one, I don't think. So here's the thing about Tesla. Who knows, let me see, how much, so Tesla when it launched, in terms of shares, the IPO, the initial public offering, was 10 years ago. Does anyone know how much you could buy a Tesla share for at that time? No? $17 a share. Anyone know how much the share is? Oh, I haven't got my phone on. Does anyone know what the share price is today? Yeah, $700 a share. So if you'd whacked a bit of money into a few of those shares and just sort of forgot about them, you'd have a lot of money now. This company is now worth $119 billion. It's only behind Toyota as the most valuable automotive company in the world. Volkswagen is worth $90 billion. Ford and GM, they're in the dust. They're way back. These are companies. Ford was the first proper car company in the world. I spoke to Bill Ford recently, who's the great-grandson of Henry Ford, you know, who developed mass production and all of that sort of stuff. I said, you know, it was the launch of what they call the Mustang Mach-E, which for a lot of people who like Mustangs is like, you know, what's going on? This is wrong. But nonetheless, it's a full EV that they've made, and you look inside, it's got a little screen there. You know, you think, oh, I think I've seen that before. And I said to Mr. Ford, it's very nice, a really, you know, good luck. It's great to see this. I'm sure your great-grandfather will be very proud of you. But it's a bit like Tesla, isn't it? And then we didn't talk anymore after that. He walked off. But here's the thing about Tesla. I think they are, they're amazing. They're part of why we're where we are right now. There's no doubt about that. But I think we've over-focused on electric cars when the focus should have been on those other things. I won't go through the mantra again. But this is a truly significant company. I'm not here to give you any share price advice. In fact, I'll caveat that because I know this is being recorded, isn't it? Do not take anything that I say as any kind of financial advice whatsoever. In my little humble personal opinion, part of the reason why they're now so valuable is two things really. One, China. So they're the only OEM in China that's not part of a joint venture. They are the new energy vehicle company that all around the world everyone knows has been successful. And once you're friends of the Chinese government, especially in China, with this growing market, you're in a good place. It's not a bad place to be. I think the other thing that they have, quite a few things, well, no, there are three things then. The other thing is the supercharger network. So they are the only manufacturer who's come out with electric cars, they've had several now, where they say to a customer, would you like our electric car? Looks lovely, shiny and everything, got steering wheel still, that'll soon go, and a few other things. And people say, well, yeah, it's quite nice, but where would I charge it? No problem, you get a charging, look, you get that with it. It's like a pair. The other manufacturers are a bit like, here's our lovely shiny electric car. You know, it's better than Tesla. You know, we make sure the door alignments are good and like all the fit and finish is a little bit better. And you say, oh, wow, yeah, that's it. Where do I charge it? Well, that's your problem. It's extraordinary, really, when you think about it. They've done such an amazing job bringing out those two things together, car, charger. It's like Ford, Standard Oil. So when Ford came out, he didn't build a charging network, actually, but Standard Oil conveniently brought out petrol stations, so they nicely came together. So I said three things, didn't I? The other thing I think you're going to find, and partly why I think their value is going up, is they have in development, and I think they're close, probably 2, 3, 4 years away, bringing out radically better battery technology. What do I mean by that? Well, something that's possibly 2x, 3 times the energy density, maybe a similar price or even less. And if you can then package that on vehicles, you can either have smaller batteries still doing the range that you need, or you can have batteries that are going to do 1,000 miles. Personally, I can't see the point in having cars that have a 1,000-mile range, but who knows? It's Tesla. They do all sorts. So yeah, they're the best of everything and the worst of everything just because of the focus on cars. Because here's the thing, if you look around at deaths caused by nitrous oxide from diesel engines all around the world, it's not a pretty picture. In fact, it's a disgraceful picture. Because if you look at some of these numbers, and some will say they're bigger than this, but let's take these as a reasonably authoritative assessment, 28,000 human beings in the EU, 2,900 in the US. These are individuals, these are people that could be your brother or your mother or your sister or your auntie. If those sort of numbers, if these were about terrorist attacks or things that are much more in the public eye and certainly in a political perspective, something would be done about them immediately. There'd be a huge reaction to it. Any sort of resource that needed to be applied would be applied because that sort of number is just huge and wrong. But somehow we've taken it over time, almost, dare I use the term, as collateral damage. It's collateral damage to maintain the status quo of significantly important industries, the motor industry and all the supply things that go with it. I'm not berating that industry because I've worked in it. I've been a part of it. I've had, my income from it. So I hope that doesn't sound like I'm berating it. A lot of what we've seen and what we've been talking about is about unintended consequence. But when we know that consequence, we should act. And here's the thing, I think I mentioned this earlier. If you look at the story of car ownership and utilization around the world, it's lots of things. It's about politics, economics, social aspiration, all sorts of things. And it's a huge variable all around the world, only 22 in India and all these other numbers, etc. But here's the thing. When I showed you, first of all, that slide that had the quartet of change on it, connected, autonomous, shared and electric, to me, the biggest issue with cars is ownership, is the lack of utilization. The fact that for 5 or 10% of the 90% of the time or more, they don't turn a wheel. They don't work. They aren't used. That is just such a huge waste of natural resources or the supply chain that's gone into making that vehicle all around the world. That's the issue. The dominant issue over EV is if we have 1 billion electric vehicles on the planet instead of 1 billion internal combustion engine vehicles on the planet, it would be a nightmare. That would just be the wrong thing to have done. And if then you look around the world at where we are, the growing populations, because again, population and demographics impact on all of this, the two big areas where population growth is going to come over the next few decades is Africa and Asia. The interesting thing is there, culturally, both of those countries and continents are much more inclined and capable of sharing because that's how they've done it. And not just because of relative poverty, well, I suppose predominantly because of relative poverty, let's be honest. But I think with new technology, and particularly with the ability in all those countries for people to have their own computer in their hand and to connect up with resources and match supply and demand together, this to me is the most important area of growth. Not electric vehicles per se, but shared electric vehicles that are progressively connected, they already are, but then eventually fully autonomous. Now, go back to charging infrastructure for a second. This is not a Tesla advert, by the way, and just for the record, I don't have any shares. I told my wife we should have bought some shares a few years ago, and she said, it's too risky. You can imagine the conversations we're having these days. Anyway, that's another story. I had the good fortune, an opportunity to ask probably the best person in the world to ask about charging infrastructure, I think this was about 6 years ago, what he thought about a few things. So I'm just going to let this play. It's only a couple of minutes. So if you don't know who that is, it's Elon Musk of Tesla.
Hi, Elon, Roger. Be keen to know, in terms of fast charging, battery swapping and wireless charging, how you think those things might be in the mix and whether one of them might ultimately prevail.
Sure. Well, I think my guess is that it's mostly going to be about really fast charging. That's what I think it's going to be. But we are going to, we have designed the car to allow for battery pack swapping, and we're going to run a battery pack swap test. So you'll be able to swap battery pack traveling from LA to San Francisco or back. If that gets a lot of use, then we're going to expand that broader and bring it to the UK as well. So we're going to really just see what do people want, and we'll respond accordingly. On the inductive charging point.
Okay, what did he say about inductive charging? Sorry about the quality of that, but it was filmed on a potato, I think. Something like that anyway. So a mix of charging options ahead. Battery swap, wireless charging and cable charging. That's what I asked Mr. Musk about. So those little symbols there, that's obviously a charger thing. That's NIO, that's a Chinese company using battery swap. They're not the only ones. And for a lot of people in the industry, it's like flogging a dead horse. What's the point? It's too technical, it's too tricky, it doesn't work. Why the hell is anyone doing it? And anyway, there was a company called Better Place about 12 years ago that raised nearly $1 billion and ended up failing. And remember what I said earlier on about trial and error and disruption. Often things don't work in the first iteration. It's a bugger's muddle, but then it's refined and fixed and works. So it could be that we're seeing that now working quite nicely. So this is battery swapping in China. NIO is a Chinese startup. They've been going for 6 years, I think now. And the reason why they have battery swapping is because then people don't have to own the battery. They can just lease the battery, which takes away the risk of something that is going to change over time. And they have all up and down China now on the main transport corridors, these battery switch stations where you pop in and a little valet chap comes out and in you go and out you come with a fresh battery, fully charged in about 5 or 6 minutes. So I think this will have a place. I don't think this will be a dominant feature of where we go with infrastructure, but it will have its place. Wireless charging. I have to make an admission here now. I have vested interest in talking to you about wireless charging, just very briefly, because I'm on the advisory board of an American company called Momentum Dynamics, and they have been delivering high-power wireless charging for some time. That's a little comment from UK Power Networks about them. So what does wireless charging on buses look like? I'll show you.
In 2015, BYD was new on the market at that time in the US. We looked at their technology and thought this had a potential to really work for us. The wireless charging has been effectively trouble-free. Been really amazing what we've been able to achieve with that. So we have a 200 kilowatt wireless charger. Actually, I think it's the first in the world. It takes that bus from about 140 mile range and takes it to about 270 miles.
Our goal is strategically to replace all of our urban service with battery electric within the next 5 years. We recognize the fact that we need to wean ourselves off fossil fuel. What people don't realize is the quietness of a battery electric vehicle and how that impacts your daily life in an urbanized area.
So that's a wonderful company called Link Transit in Wenatchee, Washington. They've been running these wireless chargers for some time, and as the chap said earlier, you take a 160 mile range battery and you turn it into an electric bus, turn it into 200 and something by range extending the vehicle with the infrastructure. Good thing about this is the interoperability of it. Once you've got the two devices to receive and connect, means that you're not worrying about cables and cable types and all the other things, payment protocols. It's all managed with RFID and simply transferring the electrons using induction. Nothing new. Nikola Tesla actually nurtured this very much, but what he didn't have at the time, unfortunately, was RFID, so he wasn't able to explain to his backer, JP Morgan, that you could tag it, that you could know who got the electron. Because perhaps back in the day, had he been able to show that on electric vehicles, the whole of history might have been completely different. But JP Morgan, being a banker, when Nikola Tesla said to him, look, isn't it great? Don't you really love it? He said, well, how will we know? How do I get paid for all these people having this electricity? I don't know. We just give it to them. You don't say that to bankers. You don't give anything to people that way. But there we are. So a couple more slides and we're done. Here's a thing that I'd like to share with you. What lessons have been learned? Personally, in terms of the journey from MODEC and the London taxi thing with hybrids and all that sort of stuff, to the bigger picture of where are we with climate change, I think this is the important thing. Qualify the problem you're trying to solve before you design the solution. You know, I'm afraid the last few decades have been littered with particularly political ambition that's just not taken the advice of science or engineering or just people that understand stuff and can get things done. I do hope that the government now are perhaps learning some of those lessons and taking counsel in the right places. It's a little bit alarming, look at how some of these dates are always just shoved out there as announcements and you never or you rarely see the plan that goes with it. You know, this is the chronology of events, this is the technology we're going to use to get to this point. It's just a kind of nice soundbite. I do hope that's not what we have earlier on today, but we'll see. But this is the crucial thing, to work out what you want first. As a final slide, I like to make little videos. Again, on LinkedIn, what I learned quite quickly was video works well in terms of engagement or pictures. Of course you should write, but if you can kind of combine those few things together, and I make little videos just on iMovie. I don't have an assistant, I don't have a studio or anything like that. So this is a little video I made to try and express my thought on where we are.
We do have an impact.
Don't know why it's so quiet.
I don't believe the impact is nearly what some say, and other scientists that dispute those findings very strongly.
Hello, I'm Severin Suzuki, speaking for ECHO, the Environmental Children's Organization. We're a group of 12 and 13-year-olds trying to make a difference.
And why should I be studying for a future that soon will be no more?
The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Okay, that's my take on it all. Thank you very much for your very generous and kind attention. Thank you.